Canada is building something that could make Washington very nervous. While America has treated Canadian minerals as a reliable part of its defense supply chain, Canada is forming new partnerships across Europe and Asia. If those deals keep growing, America could face a problem it never expected. Canadian minerals may no longer be sitting there waiting whenever US defense planners need them. And the bigger these deals become, the harder it could be for American defense planners to assume that Canadian minerals will simply be waiting for them. The shift starts with Germany, where Canada signed an agreement focused on critical minerals, supply chains, mining investment, refining technology, processing, and battery materials. The important part is not simply that Canada and Germany agreed to cooperate. The agreement creates a pathway for Canadian mineral production to become more closely connected to German industrial, automotive, and defense demand. That gives Germany a stronger position around resources that are becoming increasingly important. Canada's mineral portfolio covers many of the materials needed across modern industry and defense. Lithium can support battery systems and portable power, while nickel is tied to alloys and battery materials. Cobalt, graphite, copper, tungsten, and rare earth elements also have important industrial and defense applications. Some of these materials are connected to technologies such as semiconductors, radar systems, night vision equipment, electronics, batteries, and advanced military platforms. That means Canada's mineral resources are not just about mining companies and commodity markets. They can also become part of the supply chains behind major industrial and defense systems. Now look at what is happening around Germany. European countries are not approaching Canada one at a time with unrelated deals. Britain, France, Italy, and the European Union are developing their own relationships with Canada's critical mineral sector, while Japan and South Korea are also building connections. The result is a growing network of potential customers and industrial partners competing for access to Canada's expanding resource base. Canada is not simply searching for one new market. It is creating multiple paths for its minerals to reach major economies around the world. Germany's involvement goes even deeper. German naval shipbuilder TKMS has pursued connections with Canadian critical mineral projects as part of its broader industrial strategy surrounding Canada's submarine program. At the same time, E3 Lithium has been connected to discussions involving German industrial partners. Those discussions involve Canadian lithium for automotive and defense battery applications. That creates something bigger than a simple mining transaction. It links minerals, technology, manufacturing, batteries, and defense industry interests together, creating a supply chain that can extend far beyond the mine itself. Italy is following a similar path. Leonardo signed an agreement with Canada covering jet trainer, aircraft, and defense industrial cooperation. European defense companies can use these industrial relationships to connect their procurement ambitions with Canadian manufacturing and supply chains. And Canadian minerals can become part of those same relationships. That is important because defense deals are no longer only about buying finished equipment. Industrial partnerships can also involve manufacturing, investment, technology, components, and the resources needed to produce those systems. That is where the European Union enters the picture. Europe wants greater control over strategic supply chains and less dependence on Chinese processing. Its critical raw materials framework sets targets for domestic production, domestic processing, and diversification of outside suppliers. Canada fits naturally into that strategy because it can offer another source of minerals to European industries. At the same time, Canadian producers gain access to a much larger group of buyers. And if you want the real story behind how Canada is still holding its ground through tariffs, wars, and hard times, hit join below to join the membership for exclusive documentaries you won't see anywhere else about Canada's progress and rise through uncertainty. That creates a relationship where both sides have a reason to deepen their cooperation. Britain has already been building its own relationship with Canada. The two countries established a critical minerals partnership, while British defense companies have maintained interest in Canadian supply chains involving mineral-intensive components for radar, electronic warfare, and naval systems. France has also engaged Canada through defense industrial cooperation and discussions involving nuclear fuel supplies. The source also connects Canada's uranium position in Saskatchewan with France's nuclear sector. So again, the relationship is moving beyond simple trade and toward long-term strategic supply chains. Then there's Japan. Japan's relationship with Canadian critical minerals is described in the source as one of the most commercially advanced in the Indo-Pacific. Canadian graphite projects have attracted battery-related agreements, while Canada and Japan have discussed joint critical mineral stockpiling. South Korea is moving in the same direction. South Korean industrial groups are developing Canadian supply chain relationships that connect Korean industrial demand with Canadian mineral and steel production. That means Canada's network is spreading across Europe and the Indo-Pacific at the same time. Put all this together and the picture becomes very different. Canada is not simply looking for one replacement customer. It is building a wider customer base, with several major economies seeking stronger access to Canadian resources and Canadian producers gaining more choices over where their output can go. And that could become a major issue for the United States. The American defense supply chain has relied on allied sources for minerals that domestic production cannot fully provide. The source describes Canada as an important allied supplier for materials requiring greater supply security. It also points to Canadian production of gallium and germanium, two materials connected to advanced technologies and identified as important strategic resources. Both are produced in Canada, yet the source says neither is subject to a formal long-term US government offtake agreement comparable to some European industrial partnerships. But here is the part that makes this situation especially interesting. Canada's minerals are not necessarily disappearing from the American market. Canada's production base is growing, with projects involving graphite, lithium, and the Ring of Fire moving forward, according to the source. So the real question is not whether Canada has minerals. The bigger question is who builds the strongest commercial relationships around those minerals first. If production grows while European and Asian buyers establish long-term partnerships, the competitive situation could look very different from the past. And Europe appears to be moving early. Long-term offtake agreements and joint ventures can give industrial buyers a much clearer position in a future supply chain. If European companies establish those relationships before American defense procurement agencies create comparable commercial arrangements, Washington could face a very different situation. For years, the assumption could be simple. Canada is right next door, Canada is an ally, and Canadian resources are naturally available to American industry. But geography does not automatically create a commercial contract. Being neighbors does not guarantee control over future production. A government framework can create cooperation between two countries, but it does not necessarily guarantee that a specific Canadian mining company's future production is reserved for American buyers. A commercial offtake agreement is different because it can establish a direct relationship between producer and buyer for years into the future. That distinction may be the biggest story here. The United States still has powerful institutional relationships with Canada through defense cooperation and continental security arrangements. But European countries are building something different alongside those government frameworks: direct industrial connections. And once manufacturers, defense companies, battery producers, miners, refiners, and governments become tied together, changing direction becomes much harder. That is why Canada's critical minerals strategy could matter far beyond mining. It reaches into batteries, aerospace, naval construction, electronics, energy, and defense supply chains. The United States may not suddenly lose access to Canadian minerals. That is not what this shift means. The bigger concern is that Washington may no longer be able to assume it has first claim simply because Canada is its closest strategic partner.